This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Tooth and Claw, a Longmire story. The author, Craig Johnson. Craig Johnson's New York Times bestselling Longmire Mysteries have captivated fans for years with their vivid portrayal of the American West, a place where the landscape itself is a character. His work takes us far beyond the chaos of modern life and into a world where the action is swift, the justice is great, and vastness of the landscape invites reflection, resilience, and a deeper connection to something timeless. The newest edition set in this universe, Tooth and Claw. Tooth and Claw takes our inborn need for open spaces to new heights, moving the setting from the plains of Wyoming to the stark Alaskan tundra. Here, drilling for oil, the stakes are higher, the dangers closer, and the wilderness more ruthless than ever. Walt Longmire and Henry Standing Bear aren't just trying to survive, they're navigating a world that's as relentless as the polar bear stalking them. But as always, the true threat often lies closer to home. It's a fast paced, gut wrenching ride that only Johnson can deliver, and one that devoted fans won't be able to put down. Craig Johnson, New York Times bestselling author of the Longmire Mysteries, the basis for the hit Netflix original series Longmire. He is the recipient of the Western Writers of America's Spur Award for fiction and the Mountain and Plains Independent Booksellers Association's Reading the West Book Award for fiction. His novella Spirit of Steamboat was the first One Book Wyoming selection. He lives in Wyoming, population of just 26. Happy to have back on this program Craig Johnson. Welcome.
Wonderful to be here. But I mean, this has all been so flattering. I think we're done. We can just stop now,
That's
Steve. This
it?
is good.
Want me to stop? All right.
Thanks. It's been great. Again, thank you so much.
This book started what, almost 5 years ago, and there's some Alistair MacLean connection in here too.
There is when
Inspiration,
I
I should say.
absolutely, absolutely. I started this thing off like about 5 years ago. And what I was trying to do was trying to do like about a novella rather, every 5 years. And so I got started on this one, I got about a third of the way into it, and it just wasn't doing what it is that I wanted it to do. And so then I decided, all right, well maybe I'll just put it on the shelf and just let it sit there for a while and marinate, maybe. And then something terrible happened. I forgot about it, and it's been there on the shelf for a little while. Again, and then finally it dawned on me because I think it was Brian Tart, the president of Viking, who asked me. He said, "Didn't you have another novella started like that?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, absolutely." Let me get back to you on that. And so I grabbed it out and looked at it and immediately could see that there were some things that I liked about it, some things I didn't like about it. And then one odd thing that I do that maybe a lot of other authors don't do is I tend to write the acknowledgments, for my books before I write the book, which is rather odd because I mean, the entire purpose of acknowledgments is, of course, to thank, the people who have assisted you or helped in the writing of that book. And of course, until you write that book, you don't know who you're going to be thanking. But if you've read my acknowledgments, one of the things I also do is I also explain to the reader why it is that I wrote the book. And the first paragraph, the first name that popped right out immediately was Alistair MacLean, like that. And I went through an Alistair MacLean period, whenever I was young, like that I absolutely read everything he ever wrote. I mean, I'm a serial reader, I think, like a lot of people are, like that. You find somebody you like, and then you go and track down every single thing they've ever written. And he was just an amazing thriller writer. And he didn't fall prey to, I think there's a formula these days where an awful lot of thrillers, and I've gotten into trouble for saying this like that, but I've referred to modern thrillers as mysteries with lobotomies, like that, where you know who did it in the first two chapters of the book, but then you have 470 pages of chase, like that, and that's really kind of difficult to sustain, in my opinion, like that. And he never fell victim to that formula. I mean, a lot of his thrillers were 200, 250, 270 pages. They were, slam bam, then they hit the ground running. They had incredible pacing. They had these exotic locales. They had these teams of individuals going in to attempt to try and do, what would be seen as relatively impossible, jobs like that. And so I remembered, okay, that's why I was, writing this book. Okay, and I thought about what was one of the most exotic locales that Walt had, been in like that. And I'd already done Vietnam, like that, and I've got a book where he's in Johnston Atoll, like that, but I thought, maybe Alaska, that would be the North Slope of Alaska during the winter equinox. And I go up to Alaska at least once a year in the summertime going fishing. I go salmon fishing up there. And I've referred many times to Alaska as, kind of like Wyoming on steroids, is what I refer to it
Mhm.
as.
You had an encounter with a bear, Kodiak bear, right? While
I
fishing.
did.
Yeah, I know you talked
I've
about this in the
actually
acknowledgments. Yeah.
I have. I've had a couple. I've had a couple of not particularly run-ins, I guess, like that, but at least glancing blows, shall we say, like that with some of the big brown bears. Not a polar. I've never been up far
Mm,
enough like to have any kind of run-ins with a polar bear like that. But yeah, I mean, one of the places where I fish is on the Kennetoc River, near the Kodiak Islands, like it. And so obviously, there's going to be a certain population of bear in that area, like that. And yeah, I had one where I almost stepped on one. That was exciting. Like that,
mm,
and there was another one where we cruised in to see a couple of cubs that were playing in the water, and of course the mother raised up out of the reeds right there on top of us, and we were able to avoid that. And then I think the first one though for me was probably the most bone chilling. Like that, and that was when I was walking up a sandbar. And the first thing they teach you, of course, is that if you're carrying, like, two 40-inch salmon and you run into a bear, throw the salmon in one direction and you should run in the other direction like
mm,
that because they will immediately identify that salmon as a food source. You, on the other hand, maybe not quite so much, or maybe not worth the caloric output, of like, eating you like that, and fighting you to the death like that. And so anyway, I was walking along with a couple of salmon like that, and I look down and I see this footprint, and it's the biggest bear footprint I've ever seen in my entire life. It's like, at least four times as wide. I mean, I've got a 12D foot and it's still four times as wide as mine and about twice as long. And I was like, man alive, that is a big bear. And as I'm standing there, looking at this footprint, the water is coming back up in the footprint. And I was like, oh, he was just here. Okay. And
mm.
so I looked into the reeds, trying to, maybe get a look at him like that. But, boy, they get about 4 feet back into those reeds and you can't see them. But like as the old adage goes, just because you can't see them doesn't mean that they can't see you. Like it. And so, yeah, I've had a few experiences like that, but none with the big white guys like it. And, I had a friend who's an Inuit up there like that, and he had a grandson like that who was one of the spotter shooters for some of the geologic teams, where they land out there on the big ice like that, and basically set up a patrol like that to make sure that the polar bears don't come in and take some of the the crew members like that because it's the largest carnivore on land on the planet, and it's the only one that actively stalks and kills and eats human beings on a regular basis, just simply because that far north they simply have no interaction with
Yeah.
human beings and they have no interaction with firearms, and so they're just not afraid. And so we're just small seals that can't swim very fast is all we are to them like that. And I was talking to him about it like that, and he said, so you're going to write a bear book? And I said, well, it's not a bear book. I said, but it's a book that's got a bear in it. And he said, well, you know what? He said, what color bear? And I said, a white one. And he was like, oh.
Mm.
And he said, you know what they say about the color of bears? And I said, no, what's that? And he goes, if it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lay down. If it's white, say good night.
Wow, great advice. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we have plenty of black bears here in the Smokies, but they have a lot of human interaction. So it's
Yeah,
very,
which can sometimes make them even more dangerous because
yeah,
then they lose any kind of fear that they have of human beings. So, I've heard some really horror stories about black bears too, like that. But they generally aren't 12 feet tall, again, and they generally don't weigh well over 1,000 pounds, like that. And so, at least you have a fighting chance, so to speak.
yes. So that was part of your research for the book. What else did you do to research it? You go up there once a year, so you know the area a little bit.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it was like, it was difficult because I mean, it wasn't like I was writing about, the North Slope and Prudhomme Bay and the Beaufort Sea and all those kind of things, in the current condition, because the period in time in which the book takes place is I think it's like 1971. And so, it was a very different period in time, very different, equipment. A lot of things were different at that point in time. Like that, but one of the big things that was happening was the Arctic refuge, preservation movement was going on at that point in time, and there was a great deal of activity up there simply because a lot of those big oil companies were just trying to get a toehold, into that preserve, like that, so that they could still have the potential to drill. For oil. And so it was politically active. It was, there was a good reason, for certainly Walt, to be there, the head of security, for one of the geologic teams that's going in to do those ice core samplings. And so everything kind of fell into place. The only thing that hadn't fallen into place, when I went back to rewrite the book was the book seemed to be leaning towards where they were all going to be just out there on the ice. They were all just going to be, out there getting picked off one by one on the ice. And I thought that really isn't, particularly interesting enough, even to hold, a 200-page book, it seems to me. And somewhere in the back of my mind, there was something swimming around in there, waiting for an opportunity to be used. Like it, and it finally dawned on me that, there was like that. I had actually like that. I remember going up into my parents' attic, when I was young. Like, and my favorite statement about, of course, cleaning out attics is from Irma Bombeck, where she says that, no one ever succeeded in cleaning out an attic that could read. And I think that's probably true. Like that, because you get up there and then there are the stacks of newspapers and the stacks of magazines and books and all this. And sooner or later, you're sitting in a chair reading is what you're doing like that. And with this particular instance, my father had stacks of this magazine, which he must have gotten, I think, probably from my grandfather. And it was called World News Magazine. And it was very interesting in the sense that it was just interesting stories from all over the planet. But also, it was written very, very well. I mean, they were beautiful articles, extraordinarily well written. But then they had line drawings. They had these line drawings, which, kind of did nothing but help accentuate, your imagery and your imagination, as you were reading these things. It was much better than photographs because it was like a partial image almost. And there was this one article about the SS Beishimo, legendary ghost ship of the Arctic. And I remember actually taking that article out of that magazine as I was cleaning up in the attic up there and putting it in a file folder. And then it went, believe it or not, into this like six drawer oak file cabinet that I've got, which my wife tends to refer to as the black hole of Calcutta, because that's where all the stories either go to live or go to die, like that. And that article was still in there, and I remembered that article, pulled it out, and then did more research on the Beishimo and discovered that the last time that it had been cited in this 10-year cycle was 1969, 1970, and I was like, perfect
Yeah.
for my purposes. So when they need someplace, to actually hide, they very a lot of disasters happen along the way, but they finally make it on board this ghost ship that's floating out near the edge of the ice. And they make it in there, like, and of course, they have, these, coal stoves. They can get them all started up. Like they even find 3 bottles of French brandy, so they're set up. They've already called in their location, from the C-119 that's, been sunk into the water by now, but they already called it in. So now they're just going to sit around in the warmth, like, and drink brandy and be just fine. The only problem being they're not alone. There's something else on board that ship.
That's a great tease right there. But you got that ghost ship, and that was the missing link,
It
right?
was. It
Missing
was.
ingredient.
As soon as I found that, I remembered that, I was like, "Oh, this is just perfect for my purposes," because it just, it lent such a claustrophobic, kind of quality, whereas, just being out there in the open expanse of the tundra and the ice and everything. I mean, that's a different kind of storyline, like to be trapped on there trying to survive, and then to have the worst thing that could possibly be on there with you, trying to make sure that you don't survive, made for a pretty good dramatic conflict.
Craig, what do you think? Speaking of ingredients, what do you think of the key ingredients that make up a good thriller, a good mystery?
Well, I mean, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to Alistair MacLean again. Is
Mm.
what I'm going to do. Pacing is essential. I think that you've got to have a pace that's breakneck. Because it's just what the genre calls for. But one of the other things is that as I was saying before, like an awful lot of the ones nowadays seem to who did it in the first two chapters. Like you never knew who did it in an Alistair MacLean. I mean, he would run you all the way up through until the very last page of the book, for goodness sake. Like, and I enjoyed being on tour and singing his praises. Because a lot of people, it's interesting, didn't remember him. A lot of people did, but a lot of people didn't. And all I had to do was just rattle off the names of all the movies that have been made from his books. Whether it was Force 10 from Navarone, whether it was Ice Station Zebra, whether it was Where Eagles Dare, like that. I mean, you never knew, who were the good guys and who were the bad guys until you got to the very bitter end of the book. Like, and it was remarkably done. These intricate, plot lines that he had, where the characters were very well motivated, for what it is that they did. Whether you agreed with what they did and why they did it, or what they did, you had to agree for why they did it. Like, and so for me, those were some key elements, I think. Also, those exotic locales don't hurt.
No.
All that, that wafting, right, machismo, like that, in those ends of the earth, kind of places like that. It's once again, like I described Alaska, in many senses, kind of a mystery on steroids in many ways.
You've been writing for a while now. How do you think you've evolved as a writer?
Oh gosh, I hope I have. I hope I have it all. I think that I think one of the key elements there, I think, is that it's very easy to fall into the trap of becoming formulaic for a number of different reasons. One is just being lazy, like that, and you just get lazy and don't change or challenge yourself. Like that. The other thing that happens, I think, to a lot of writers is that they have a inordinate success, perhaps like maybe even with one book, like that it does really, really well, like that. Well, then they get a certain amount of pressure from the publisher, like that, to reproduce that book because it replicated such amazing sales, like that. And I've been extraordinarily fortunate in the sense that being with Viking Penguin, a truly literary press, like they never put any pressure on me about what it is I write about or what I do. I mean, the contracts, for my books, I laugh about them because all they say is it must be a mystery and have Walt Longmire in it. Well, that's it. I mean, I can get into a lot of trouble going in a lot of different directions
Mm.
after instruction like that. But yeah, I would hope that I've gotten a little bit more confident. I mean, I know when I first started out, anytime you start out in any art form, there's going to be a certain amount of insecurity. But I do think that's something that you should strive to retain also, in the process. I think that if you get too cocksure of yourself, if you get too confident in what it is that you're doing, you're not going to recognize it whenever you're doing bad writing or, bad storylines, like it or bad character development. And so there should always be, no matter how confident you become, I think a certain amount of insecurity to help kind of fuel what it is that you're doing. And I think there's a balance in all those things. And so the good things, yeah, they come, but there's a trade-off, for some of those things. You just want to make sure that you don't go too far in one direction and not in the other.
Does writing energize you or exhaust you?
Energizes,
Mm.
energizes, energizes. I don't know. I don't know what I would do. Look at if I didn't have the writing. When I'm out, working on the ranch, I'll be out there. According to what the weather conditions are, I can be out there. Well, I can be out there today, and it would be about 17 degrees. Look at the wind's blowing at about 38 miles an hour,
Mm.
and where your eyelids freeze together and that type of thing. And or it can be, in August and be 103 degrees outside there, and I'll be down in the irrigation ditches trying to get a turnbuckle to loosen, with a pair of waders on, like it, and be covered with mud and blood and cow shit like that. And I'll tell you what, like that, you do that for a couple of hours and you come inside and take a shower, suddenly writing looks really good. Yeah. I just, for me, it's an escape into that world. I can, disappear into Absaroka County, and I think in many ways, it's the same reason why people read the books. I'm having the same experience and the same feeling I think that people have who read the books. They look forward to the opportunity to see these characters again. That they're old friends like that, and they can't wait to see what it is they're going to be involved with, or what's going to happen with them like that. And it's the same thing for me when I'm writing the books too. And then the challenge becomes, setting them up one at a time, playing each one, as an entity unto itself. I mean, you want, to think that, when you're done someday, and you pass on to that, that land where no traveler born returns, like that, that the books that you leave behind. I'd like to think that they're all kind of interweaved together. I mean, there are actual instances like that, mentions, in pieces that are in the Cold Dish, the first novel that I wrote 20 years ago, that reference the actions in Tooth and Claw. I want each one of those books to be a standalone novel, but I also want them to kind of weave together to make a tapestry of Walt Longmire that hopefully will be, like 40 books long, and have some longevity, that people will, still want to read these books 10, 20, 30, 100 years from now, hopefully.
I know you were just on tour. What's the best thing about being an author, Craig?
Wow. You always ask these really tough questions. Like, and let's see, like that, because that's so hard because there's so many. I mean, that's the thing is there are so many wonderful things about, the process, and the work, of writing. I mean, I love tours, don't get me wrong. And I really enjoy meeting people and talking about the books and hearing what they have to say, like that, and telling them about the books and seeing the excitement, that they have, like in hearing about what's going to happen next and all of that. But if you don't enjoy sitting down in a room, by yourself, and basically typing about your imaginary friends, you're probably doing the wrong job.
Hmm.
I've had a lot of students, at workshops, they'll ask me, they'll say, well, what's that like to go out and have a beer, with Lou Diamond Phillips, and what's that, and I'm like, or what's that like to walk into an auditorium, with 500 people in there like that are, hanging on your every word. And I'm like, well, it's great, don't get me wrong, but that's only like about maybe, 5%, of what it is that I do. Like, and the other 95% is going into a room by myself and typing about my imaginary friends. And so, you have to have that little bit of extrovert to go with a lot of that introvert,
Hmm.
I think. And I don't know. I mean, that ability to sit down and create that art form by yourself, is something to be, admired and enjoyed a great deal. I mean, with the 6 seasons of Longmire that we had, with it being as popular as it is, and then we have Longmire Days, of course, in Buffalo, every summer where the actors show up like that, and it gave me kind of a worm's eye view of, what it's like to be in more of a collective, art form, where, you have the actors, you have the directors and the producers and the costume people and the prop people like that and everybody like that. But it's more of a collective effort between all of those people. Whereas, boy, when you're a writer, you go into the room, sit down, and it's, as my wife Judy says, you're the only one in the room.
Hmm.
And it's kind of up to you at that point in time. And I have to admit, I think I really enjoy that aspect of it. That it's, the ball's in my court, so it's mine to, to win or lose. Like it's my responsibility.
Did you always want to become a writer? Was there a teacher who inspired you at a young age?
You know what? I came from a family of storytellers. They were all extraordinary storytellers, especially my mother. My mother
Hmm.
was a fantastic storyteller, and I was the worst one, Steve. I was the worst storyteller in my whole family. And I gave up, on trying to tell stories because I just wasn't very good at it. And I don't know, somewhere, in my teenage years, I thought, you know what, if you can't tell them, maybe you should like sit down and think about writing them. And that kind of, that kind of kicked it off for me, I have to say. Like, and I had a lot of wonderful instructors at a lot of different places like that, but probably the biggest, influence of all was just, good writing. Whenever I would read good writing, it would just, astound me and inspire me. Like I would think to myself, okay, this person did this, like, and they were spectacular at it, like that. You might not reach the vaulted heights that they did, but you could try. You could try your best and see what it is that you can come up with. And I don't know, after 20 novels, three novellas, and we've got one set of short stories and another one coming out next year, like that, I don't seem to have slowed down. I'm still having a blast doing what it is that I do.
Yeah, you reminded me. I can remember my father, who was an English and history teacher. He always
Mhm.
loved great writing. He would always say, if he got a letter back in the day, he would say, "What great command they have of the language." So I've
Oh.
always loved great writing.
And you read the statistics about how many people are not reading
Oh,
nowadays,
yeah.
how much
Yep.
what a problem it is with children, how everything that they read off of their phones,
Yep.
and it's nothing for me is, and I hate to sound like, one of those Luddites, but I guess I am. Nothing is ever gonna be like a book in your hand. Nothing is ever gonna be, quite the presence, and joy of the weight, of those words, like, and the feel of that parchment and the smell of that book. It's always going to be the premier aspect for me.
Especially on a cold night. Nothing like it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, the book is Tooth and Claw. The author is Craig Johnson. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Steve. Always a wonderful time to be here. And I really enjoy you have the book up there on the corner, staring
Yes.
straight out
Product
at us.
placement there. Yes.
It's a
And I
little
always
ominous
point, see, I always
looking.
point the wrong way.
It's a little
Uh,
ominous there with his claws sticking out there
It
like that, but
is.
be careful, okay? Like
I
that.
will.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you so much, Craig. And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast.